Shalom and welcome to Jewish Live, the show about people and issues in Judaism and some secrets you missed out in Hebrew school. I know him as long as I know myself. I remember him since I was born. We went through school together. First time I interviewed him, I don't think he had a clue of where he was going. He turned out to be the best-selling author, and I turned out to be just another prop on your TV set. I am pleased to have with me Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a good friend, a dear friend. He's been on the show many times, one of my favorite guests, an author of many books. Here I am. The pile is just growing. I don't even know where to start. Just to list the books will take me through the show, so I'm not even going to bother. But through the show, hopefully we'll mention some of them. His latest book is called 60 Days, A Spiritual Guide to the High Holidays. Now, of course, high holidays are Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I got news for you. For us, high holidays is every day, and of course, a holiday like Purim and Pesach are always high holidays. Rabbi Jacobson, thank you for coming. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We find ourselves now getting ready for the holiday of Purim. We're getting ready for the holiday of Pesach. The holiday of Purim. Now, it is one of the most interesting holidays. We don't rest from work. It's an ordinary day, like a weekday. But then, on the other hand, it's one of the greatest holidays. Give us a spin on that.
Okay. I think the best way to describe it is a holiday of paradoxes. As you just pointed out, the first paradox, it's a work day, technically. At the same time, it's a great holiday, celebrated with unbridled joy. It's the only holiday in the year where joy is meant to be uncontrolled, unlimited, unbridled. The expression is, until we can't even tell the difference between dark and light.
You mean to say we got to drink enough to lose control of that, huh?
Yeah.
And that's part of the religion.
Exactly. Which only makes the mystery even deeper, what's going on. At the same time, you find the expression in the Megila, which is the text, the biblical
story
text,
of Esther.
Right, that's read on Purim. You have the expression, it's the month and the day that was transformed in a moment from darkness to light. So that way, interestingly, it's the only holiday that specifically states that not just that day, but the entire month of that holiday is transformed. That's why the entire month of Adar, which is the Hebrew month,
is a happy month.
Is a happy month, a joyous month, a auspicious month for any type of new opportunities, new businesses, anything that's a new venture. And so I think the secret lies in that thin line between darkness and light, which is really where we all sometimes stand when you're at a deep point of either despair and things seem like hopeless, which was what happened in the story of Purim, that the Jews literally, we're talking here even a Holocaust, potential total genocide. Haman and Achashverosh plotted and conspired that the Jews would be all killed. And this was literal. Jews across the entire world, because he was in control. Persian Empire was then in control. And Purim...
You mean there were no allies or axes?
Exactly, no place to run.
There was only one team.
Precisely. The Megillah begins that he was a superpower that controlled 127 countries. And that was it. There was nowhere to run. There was no America, and there was no moon, and there was no internet. So where do you run? And literally, the Jews were at the brink of complete this extinction. And the miracle is that with a certain spin, a certain turn of events, which we can discuss, that everybody happened to be in the right place at the right time. Esther happened to be the queen, and Mordechai happened to overhear the conspiracy, and he was in good favor. Everything seemed to come together, and the result was the decree was overturned. A random case of luck. However, this luck has been happening to the Jewish people for 3,000 years, 4,000 years. So, in essence, it's paradox because it's not about a gradual change, or maybe not. They were literally on the cliff,
brink of extinction.
Exactly, and it turned around, and therefore.
And it wasn't the splitting of the sea.
Right, that's another which we'll discuss. And it turned around, and instead of being a day of unbelievable tragedy, it turns to be a great day of joy, because the greatest joy of all, of course, is when you see the contrast from light out of darkness. And this is the secret and mystery of Purim. So Purim is not about stopping workday. It's about in work, in the mundane, and in the material life in which we live, we can experience.
So we don't want you to lock yourself up like Yom Kippur.
Right. Interesting, Yom Kippur comes from the word Kippurim. It's like Purim. And in mystical text, it says that in some ways Purim is even greater than Yom Kippur. Because Yom Kippur, you experience transcendence through insulation, all-day prayer, fasting.
Spiritual.
Right. And in a way, avoiding any material immersion. Whereas Purim is on the contrary. It's a day of celebration, of partying, of drinking, of sending food gifts, giving charity, and everything, a type of immersion in the material, that even when you're here, so to speak, in this dark world, you can experience God. Which is really, I think, the ultimate beauty of Judaism. It's one thing you escape to a mountain to meditate, experience a spiritual epiphany. It's another, can you find it in our daily lives? That's the real challenge that people ask. And Purim's answer is unequivocally yes. That we don't just find God on Yom Kippur and in Jerusalem and in a synagogue, but even in
even in the Himalayas.
Even, right. But you can find it, and find it in the deepest way possible, even in your, so to speak, ordinary
Even
activity.
on television.
Yeah.
Use the technology of television, use the technology of the internet, and serve God in that way.
Yeah, and I think especially for people who have lost some hope or have suffered, Purim is an unbelievable, empowering message that never give up, because things can turn as quickly as they turn one way, they can turn.
I have 500,000 questions I'd like to ask. Yeah. I don't know where to start, but there's something interesting, which will tie into current events perhaps. The Jews had a tradition over the years that certain miracles, when they would happen, they would dedicate a day and they would call it Purim. You know, they would Purim of
small
a certain
Purim, like,
small Purims, right?
Yeah, right. Specialized, customized Purim.
Purim Sarasota, Purim Saragossa, Purim of various Purim Yemen, because of various miracles that happened. So we see there's something about Purim that we try to apply to our lives through history. We are reliving in a certain way. We right now have, there's a battle of good and evil. The President of the United States, with approval of Congress, declared war against evil, and we are engaged in the war of evil. There are those who don't like to be judgmental. Interesting, the war is taking place exactly, geographically, the same location where Purim. Any connections?
History is one connection. It's only a fool or someone who's in denial that tries to compartmentalize and say, oh, we're just here now. Everything of the here and now is a result of the past, and vice versa. It's all one collective continuum, so to speak. And since we're talking about the Megillah says it in very beautiful, succinct terms. It says, Hayomim ha'ela niskarim v'nasim. That these days you shall remember and recreate, which is a fundamental principle in Jewish thought, that time is not just the past, present, and future, it's recreated. It's a type of energy, that when we come back to that point in time, Purim, we're actually re-experiencing what happened then, not just remembering. It's not just a commemoration.
Doesn't the Baal Shem Tov have an interpretation on this?
Yeah, he says that when you read the Megillah backwards, the Talmud says, when you read the Megillah backwards, who would read a Megillah backwards? But the Baal Shem Tov's interpretation makes it clear. If you read the Megillah backwards, it's as if you hadn't read it. It's not lo yotze. You're not. You haven't fulfilled the mitzvah, right? So the Baal Shem Tov says, if you read it backwards, as if it happened then, and not today, it's not the way to experience it. And this, I think, is critical in the answer of your question. Events of today, to truly understand them, especially global events, and especially when, you can't ignore the fact, as you put it, it's all happening in ancient Persia. The area of Persia is Iraq, Iran, that whole little section there. Then it was called Babylon, Persia, those are the names. So how could you ignore the fact when you see similar battles? So really it's only about different names of characters but the same ideas, which has been going on from the beginning of time, which is we live in a world which in some ways is concealed from its true purpose, which is what God designed it for. And as a result of that, people go off on their own agenda, and ultimately that evolves into what we call blatant evil. The reason that one person can hurt another, that someone can get up and kill another person, an innocent person, is only as a result because they don't feel that we're part of one integral whole. The right arm would never attack the left arm. So basically, evil from a Jewish perspective, and not to minimize the tragedy of it, is essentially it's a result of God's concealment in this world. And the hotbed of that concealment always took place in that region. You know, Bovel, which is the name for Babylon, actually means confusion, a place of confusion. Persia, as you see in the Megillah, the story, it also was a lot of confusion going on among it all. And then finally, the day of Purim was a day of clarity, where it illuminated and crystallized what is true and what is false. So I would say, in a somewhat of a general context, any war of a righteous battle against people who take away the right of others to live in peace, no matter what their intentions are. Bottom line is violence, death, murder, terrorism, homicide, whatever you want to call it, is just not acceptable. Not just acceptable, not acceptable to anyone, because it's part of the universal code that God gave us. I'm stating this because in case people may wonder, why do we have to do it this way? Why do we have to do it? Why not go with a peaceful approach? Why not send them flowers or something like that? And the answer is very obvious, because there is a certain type of moral lack of ambiguity. There is a divine blueprint for life. That divine blueprint includes no violence and not allowing to kill each other, no matter what your intentions are. When that is violated, and you see a civilization basically is in danger, as President Bush put it, and I'm not justifying all his political intentions, but at the core of it, that the defending the right of all people to live peacefully is at the core of the essence of a battle. In many ways, it goes back to the battle. Haman, out of his irrational hatred of Jews, and it could have been not just Jews, it could have been any group, decides that he wants to kill the Jews for jealousy, whatever the reason is, ego. And that's simply the battle of all mankind from the beginning of time, not allowing that type of...
So basically we're still engaged. That long battle is still going on.
Absolutely.
And what is our role?
Even Saddam Hussein identified himself with Nebuchadnezzar.
He did, yes.
Of age. He called himself that. One of his battalions was that.
Babylonia, one of them was called.
And Nebuchadnezzar essentially is the grandfather or the predecessor of Achashverosh of Purim. And that's the story. So I don't want to, in a sense, also pit everything in absolute terms, as if President Bush is Mordechai and Iraq is... I think it's much more complex than that. But there are commonalities that we can learn from this. And getting beyond the complexity, it comes down to, what do you stand for? What do we stand for?
Well, we all have the people of Mordechai. As the Megillah itself has the terminology of Mordechai, the people of Mordechai.
Right. So, I honestly really believe that our biggest challenge today is one of identifying our mission. With years of prosperity, I grew up in freedom, as you did.
Unlike our parents.
Correct. Our parents grew up under Stalin in Russia. Our brothers and sisters grew up under Hitler in Europe. So when you grow up in freedom, I think there's a very big challenge. It's called complacency. A sense of everything is fine. I wake up in the morning, there's nothing compelling. When you have an enemy, you need to fight. You need to believe in something. You need to defend yourself. And this complacency settles in to almost creating almost like a comatose state, where we think everything is just cool. And then a September 11th happens, or in Israel they're going through September 11th every day, unfortunately, and you suddenly realize life is not exactly as I thought it was. It's not just about websites and cable stations and Super Bowls. And I think Purim is very much like that type of wake-up call. You mentioned something which I wanted to touch upon, if I may.
Sure.
Purim, interesting as well, God's name is never mentioned in the entire Megillah. Not once. It's a book of the Bible. How could God's name not be mentioned? It's a God's miracle, after all. At the same time, as you also implied earlier, Purim can be interpreted completely random. Bunch of random events. Achashverosh happened to get angry at his wife and kills her. A little while later, he happens to take Esther as a new queen. A while later, Mordechai happens to overhear a conspiracy. A while later, years later, Achashverosh happens to have insomnia. He can't sleep one night.
Right.
You know, that's about it. And so they read him a book. What book do they read him? The story of how Mordechai
Chronicles.
saved him. Yeah, he suddenly wants to write him. So you have all kinds of dots that if you were living at the time, this happened over, by the way, a period of 7 to 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
You were living at the time, you know, random here, random there, a bunch of independent events, fragmented events. It's only in retrospect, you step back and you say, hey, it all connects, that Esther was in the right place in the right time, and to be able to foil the plot of Haman. One of the big messages of that is that God doesn't always work as an open way where he parts the sea. God's true way of working is through our lives. The mysterious ways of divine providence are always there before us. So there are times in history we clearly need an awakening, an exodus from Egypt, a parting of the sea, a revelation at Sinai. But the truth, majority of our lives, is finding God between the lines, connecting the dots, the seemingly random dots. You know, you travel somewhere and you think, I'm just here on business or on pleasure. No, it's not true. God leads your footsteps. You have to look for now the opportunity. And I think Purim is very much about that discovery that the world that we see, as random as it seems and as circumstantial, is not arbitrary at all. There is a plan, but there's one final part of the plan which is up to us. What are you going to do about it? That's free will. There God says, I can set the stage for you, I can give you everything on the platter, but you have to take it. You have to choose.
What do we have to do? In straightforward terms, I mean, there's a world out there, there's concern, there's confusion.
Well, I think that it's a big question, what are we to do, but I would put it in groups. There's what you have to do personally, what you have to do.
I do know you have a book, 49 Steps.
Right.
And that's a great book, and I ranted and raved about the book on our show, but
yeah, I'll put it in context of Purim.
Okay.
Because, I mean, there's all year, every part of the year, there's other things one can do. I think the first thing is that every human being has to recognize they're charged with a mission that God gave them. And we acknowledge it every morning by simply saying, Moda Ani, thank you for giving me my soul. And this is universal. This is Jew, a non-Jew, religious, non-religious, Christian, Muslim, Jew, as I said, anyone. We are all created by God with a mission. And the first and foremost obligation we have is to recognize that we have that mission. And that comes down to being aware of it, not being distracted by your job, by your by mundane needs. You need to eat and sleep. So over 75% of our lives we're involved in survival. To recognize that. In Judaism, the way we recognize it is in general through 3 ways. Through study, Torah, through avodah, through service, which is prayer, some type of emotional relationship with God and our soul, and finally through actions, not just enough to meditate. Good deeds, gemilas chasadim. These are the 3 pillars.
kindness.
Kindness, generosity, charity, on all levels, whether it's visiting the sick or whether it's inviting guests to your home. So it's about a heightened sensitivity. If you think that the battle with evil is only going on in the Middle East, it's going on everywhere. There it's blatant, it's in our face. But it goes on in your heart every moment, in all our hearts. And we believe that when you fight, you win that little battle inside of you, it has a ripple effect all over the world. That's how it works. The butterfly effect, as they say, you know.
So basically, yeah.
No. I was going to add just that on Purim specifically, the focus on that generosity is obvious. The Purim holiday, which is again a lesson that anyone can learn, we share. We invite guests to our home
For a feast.
We send food gifts to each other, not just general gifts, but food gifts, practical gifts that can be used, and we give charity. It's all about a form of unity that, so to speak, counters the divisiveness that exists out there. The Megila says it, that this is one nation, Haman said, that's spread out everywhere.
How do we counter it?
Right. So so I think it's about first and foremost sensitivity in your own heart, sharing it with your children and families, and creating a sense of spiritual unity in our communities, which spills over.
So basically, what you're saying right now is contrary to what some may think, that religion would require for you to lock yourself up in the synagogue on Yom Kippur, and this is the epitome of religion. What we're learning from Purim basically is eat, drink, enjoy your family, do what you need to, but make sure you do it for the right reasons and in the right way.
Absolutely. Because you see, in Judaism, ultimately the integration of the material and spiritual part of our lives is the secret. It's not about escaping into the soul and denying the material world, which is impossible regardless, because we have to survive. But the beauty of Judaism that I find when you compare it to other systems, I'm not here to compare, but just is that it's not about asceticism and escaping into the spirit. It's also not about indulging in the material. It's about this, going back to the initial paradox, this mysterious way of how we
find the perfect blend.
Yeah, we spiritualize the material world by taking a piece of food, eat it, but instead of indulging, you make a blessing. You're sensitive to the fact that the strength you get from the food will give you power to be a better person. And that's the beauty of it.
Well, Rabbi Jacobson, I quite frankly am looking forward to continuing this conversation in the very near future, because I believe we can sail through the entire year. Here you have a book toward a meaningful life, 60 days about the high holidays, 49 steps about the period between Passover and Shavuos. You have a series of tapes on Kabbalah, and then you have the great one. I mean, this is most hilarious, Beyond Dogma. That's Rabbis Jacobson, Rabbis Simon and Yosef Jacobson. They are the greatest. Anyway, I do hope to have you both together here too, and that's going to be Jewish Entertaining Hour.
We should mention the website where this is available.
Absolutely. All this stuff is available on the website, which is on the screen, and you can contact Rabbi Jacobson to learn more about his lectures. He has his weekly lectures. He has lectures that are more prominent, more special. He travels the world, travels the country. So I hope you've got a little tease of Rabbi Jacobson's teachings. And we do hope that through this show we will bring you closer to the mystical, at the same time, mundane life, way of life that Judaism expects from you, that God expects from us, to make this world a better place, to make this world a dwelling place for God's presence. Not in the abstract, but rather in the tangible. Thank you very much, Rabbi Jacobson. This was a good
My pleasure.
Teaser for a series, hopefully. And to you, our listeners, prepare this world, increase in kindness and goodness, and prepare this world to make it a better place. And until we meet again, hopefully with Mashiach, we want to wish you bracha v'atzlacha, a happy Purim, and all the best.
Mashiach, Mashiach, Mashiach. Mashiach, Mashiach, Mashiach. Mashiach, Mashiach, Mashiach. Mashiach, Mashiach, Mashiach. She'isma meya im kol ze achake lo bechol yom sheyavo.